Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For more than 28 years, this TV series has provided a wide variety of information about issues such as peace, social justice, economics, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are not adequately heard in mainstream media. This month, we'll explore new information and insights into the realities that young people experience who spend time downtown. Among the general public, some people complain about these young folks, but often without considering the circumstances of the young people themselves. During this hour, we will learn a lot about what they actually experience, and will recommend positive solutions. While this program focuses especially on young people, much of our conversation will pertain also to people of other ages who spend time downtown. The most common way that governments and social service agencies deal with people is from the top down, but in contrast, we have three guests who practice real solidarity with the people with whom they interact, and I'm happy to welcome three people that I appreciate to be guests on the program. Cole Ketcherside is program coordinator for the Street Outreach Program of Community Youth Services. Cole has provided a variety of direct services for at-risk young people and has been doing outreach in Olympia since 2004. Cole has a relevant bachelor's degree and is working on a master's degree. It's good to have you here, Cole.
Thanks.
Long-haired David came to Olympia in 1991 after release from prison and lived in a halfway house here in the community. In Olympia, he accomplished a lot of very positive things for the community as a whole. He started new groups, including Eggy Hop, the Emma Goldman Youth and Homeless Outreach Project, and Books to Prisoner. He's widely respected and appreciated by many people, including me. It's good to have you here, David. Thank you for joining us. Meg Martin is the program director for the Emergency Overnight Shelter operated by Interfaith Works of Thurston County. This new shelter is located at First Christian Church at 7th and Franklin downtown. Meg has 7 years of experience doing street outreach, including providing mental health services. Meg has a master's degree in social work and strong experience in the field. Good to have all of you here. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm looking forward to sharing information with the viewers that'll make our community better. A lot of people in the general public have negative feelings about young people that they see downtown, and some of the public's negative feelings are based on assumptions that really are not true. Let's start the program by clearing up some of the misunderstandings and correcting some myths. Cole, I wonder, can you start us out with some common misperceptions about young people downtown, and then what the real information is?
Certainly. One of the common misperceptions that folks may have of young people downtown is that they choose to be down there, that they are unruly or irresponsible or don't want to follow the rules at home. And in my experience, I've found that to be pretty far from the truth. The majority of the youth that I work with at Community Youth Services are coming from experiences where they've had trauma in their lives. They're coming out of the foster care system and don't have the stability that they need to live independently. Many of them are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered, and maybe have been kicked out of their home due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. Family conflict is probably the #1 reason that young people are on the streets. So I don't think we can simplify it and say that they just don't want to follow the rules. There's a lot of complex and overlapping reasons why young people are down there.
Yeah. When we were preparing for the program on the phone, Meg, you mentioned about not making snap judgments or assumptions about people. Pay attention to our biases so we can refrain from misjudging people. Can you say something on that?
Yeah, I think that for the adult population, which is who we primarily serve at the Interfaith Shelter, much of what Cole is saying is true for them as well. And for a lot of folks, they were street youth many years ago and are now continuing to experience homelessness for various reasons. And I think that it's just really important for everyone to be able to know what our own biases are, so that whenever, I mean, we make snap judgments about each other all the time, right? You know, you go downtown, you see somebody, whether they're experiencing homelessness or not, and you make snap judgments about them. And I think that if we're able to understand our own biases first, then we're less likely to assume things about other people. And I think that that's one of the things that really happens, is that there's so many assumptions that's made about the people that are living downtown. And a lot of times there's just so much more to a story that people don't know.
Mm-hmm. Cole, you mentioned another misperception that a lot of folks have, which is the sense that, oh, there's all these social services in Olympia, and so we become a magnet for people to come from all over the place to take advantage of our social services. Would you dispel that myth?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I can tell you that of the youth that we serve in our drop-in center, Rosie's Place, and we see on average 35 to 45 youth a day come through the door, a majority of them are from right here in Thurston County. I would say upwards of 75% of the youth that we serve and the youth that are hanging out downtown grew up here in Thurston County. These youth are our neighbors' kids, they're our kids, they're our school children's friends. So that misperception really does damages when it comes to advocating for services that are needed to support our communities. Some of those individuals are coming from rural communities in South Thurston County, such as Rainier, Yelm, Tenino, Bucota, and they do tend to come up to Olympia because that is where the services are. But a very small fraction of those individuals are actually coming from outside of Thurston County. So if you look at on paper, if you look at the data, that is completely untrue, that folks are just flocking here from services. But what I can tell you is true is that the general population, if you look at population increases over the last 30 years, a majority of the population increase in Thurston County has come from other people moving here from other places. You know, so I would say that that is probably true for, I know it's true for myself. I came here to go to school at Evergreen, and I know a lot of people come here for the opportunities that are available.
But that's middle-aged adults.
They're all transients to
Yeah,
me and you.
yeah. We've been here a long time.
Yeah. I was born in Fort Lewis, and you know, my grandfather homesteaded right there where Panther Lake School is. And
What else, David, based on your experience, what else should we know about the realities of the younger folks
well,
downtown?
first of all, the one pink elephant I'd like to identify, stomping around this room right now, is all people on the streets are homeless. Okay, so when I sat down and I laid out the target population for Eggy Hop years ago when I was trying to prepare that acronym to get it to have a sound, Eggy Hop, the Emma Goldman Youth Homeless Outreach Project, was originally going to be just a youth. I was working with your predecessor, CYS at the time, and we were going to do a youth thing. And I just didn't like the thought of going out there, and you know what I'm talking about, playing God. I have services for you, but not services for you. The first misconception is the street population is what I call our target population, Eggy Hops. And they make up of couch surfing individuals. It makes up people that are camping, people, just various. I think the 75% carries forward to the homeless population. About 75% are locals. But then again, a lot of you are not that so local, so everybody's running around pointing a finger at who they seem to think is transient, when some of them I've known for 20 years. Yeah. And you come up here and you just moved here to Lacey 2 years from now, and you're going to tell me how you feel my downtown should run. That's my backyard.
Yeah,
and you're the transient.
Right. Yeah, because the established political and economic interests keep trying to attract people to town, grown-ups, people who have jobs, people who have money. So why don't we call them
point
transient?
of interest right here. This word transient. It's like a lot of words being used in society today, and it dehumanizes and stuff like that. It's the same thing that's done in misogynist behavior by men towards women. If I look at you as not as a transient. I don't know you as an individual. I don't know you as a person. Then I can subjugate you to any of my ill-begotten perceptions.
Yeah, and that we're going to revisit that because that's really an important point, and a couple of you had mentioned that when we were preparing for the program.
And, you know, to kind of jump on what David is speaking about is, you know, a lot of people have this perception that the folks who are downtown are one type of individual, that they're all the same. And in reality, there's a lot of different subpopulations that exist on the streets. You know, a lot of the young people that we work with, like David's saying, they're not all homeless. And in fact, our youth use the term housey to describe someone who's kind of like a part of the street community but does have a home to go to at night. We use the term street dependent often to refer to folks who are on the streets, recognizing that you know, housing is a physical circumstance, and that a person who's enculturated to the streets, that's more of a mentality. That's more of a social group, a way to get your needs met and to build relationships with your community. And I say that not to undermine the importance of housing, but housing plus community building, housing plus helping folks have opportunities that they need to connect with their community, you know, in a meaningful way.
So there are several dimensions to pay attention to. One is the community of who you are and where you feel like you belong or don't belong. And then the other dimensions include things like, do you have a place to sleep tonight or not?
Right.
And is it a safe place or a not safe place, and so forth. So there's a lot of, there's a lot more nuances than a lot of people's stereotypes allow for.
There's just so many misconceptions, and the only way that you're going to clear up most of these conceptions is to get down and meet the people. Olympia is famous. It's one of the hippest cities on the West Coast. And what makes Olympia so dear to us, especially that feel that we know the reason why it's the hippest city, is the multi-layers of subculture within it. And it's the same within the homeless population. It really reflects that. It's really a multi-layered, just some of the most unique individuals I've ever met.
I'd like to add on the topic of transient. I mean, it's so important to recognize that we're living on occupied land. And I mean, I think that that's something that really gets missed often in that discussion is that regardless of whether you're from Colorado or California and you come here, Olympia is occupied native land. And disproportionately, we see in our shelter a disproportionate number of folks that are First Nations people than I think the general population. And so there is a greater element at play that is a structural element in our society that I think really often does play into the stigmatization of individual people. So I just want to add that to the transient discussion.
An important irony among the many ironies.
You go back 400 years and we're all transient, except for maybe David here.
Point of interest, I wish I was Salish or something non-transient to the area, but my people were here right after the Salish people and stuff, homesteading in Waterville, also my grandfather. But the one thing I want to identify is a couple of things. One, the root cause of homelessness is poverty. Okay, that's the biggest cause of homelessness and homeless youth. We have more throwaway youth than we have runaway youth. We have more throwaway youth on the streets than we have runaways. Youth at risk today is 5 times greater than when I started in 1991.
You mean it's riskier, 5 times riskier? Yeah.
So we have and also our population is becoming more compact, and our statistics show that, that it's more local people who are habitually homeless or chronically homeless. The street population, though, I really want people to understand that it is a multi-layer faceted population that we target as Agihop especially, that doesn't necessarily mean you're homeless at all.
Yeah. I want to follow up on this point and ask Meg about why is it that it's so hard for people who are on the street to get off the street? We talked about this on the phone when we were preparing, and you also had some ideas on this too. Let's start with Meg.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons, and one of them is that it's not a particularly fast process to become housed, if you've been homeless, particularly the longer that you've been experiencing homelessness, the harder it is to transition into housing. It's not often as simple as just getting a job or just, you know, getting back into school or whatever these things are that we think that for most of us that might have more of a strong foundation already underneath us, you can kind of just make those decisions and they make big waves in your life. But for other folks, there's really serious mental health challenges and a real lack of mental health services that are accessible to people that are living on the streets. Sometimes there is substance use that does play in, and oftentimes substance use is a pretty effective coping tool for people that are living with really serious mental health challenges. It's a way.
If you're self-medicating, if things hurt, something hurts,
Yeah.
and you self-medicate with some alcohol, drug, whatever.
And we often see with our folks that when they don't have access to their mental health services, they're more likely to self-medicate. When they do have access, they don't see that as a necessity. And so oftentimes, we right now have a person who has been restricted from using the buses, and so they're no longer able to get to BHR, way out on Martin Way.
Yeah, and that's the mental health agency that's remotely located.
Behavioral health resources out on Martin Way, and so they're then left to walking 4 miles to receive their medication, and so folks end up self-medicating.
So that makes it harder to get off the street, and yet our response when we talked about the problems, the misperceptions and the myths, what we do then was if somebody is taking drugs or alcohol to relieve the pain that they feel of whatever kind of pain, we pass a judgment on them rather than recognize that as a symptom of something going on that needs to be dealt with in a better way.
Yeah, and I think that it's all really on a spectrum. You know, I think that most people can understand or at least relate to doing something like a glass of wine after a stressful day at work, or any sort of thing like that that is tied to a substance and stress release. I think the general public can sort of understand that as a concept, and then really it's just on a spectrum. And if you've got compound stressors every single day, day in, day out, and you're just surviving, you know, doing everything you can to survive, then you can make that leap a little bit.
So some empathy would be helpful for people who have a glass of wine after a stressful day at work to recognize other people who have multiple stressors. You had something?
No, I find it funny. What I see as a cry for help, sometimes other people see as a blatant disregard, or I see, you know, a person crashed in a doorway and there's 3 empty beer bottles and a syringe laying there in broad view of public, and I see a cry for help. I see a cry for help more than I see a blatant disregard towards the community. It's all in perception.
Yeah.
And we have a choice. I learned this early on as a Catholic worker from one of the beginning Catholic workers at Bread and Roses. And she told me that, David, we have a choice. When those people come through our doors at Bread and Roses, we have a choice to see the good or to see the bad in those individuals. You know, and we've been ingrained since childhood to look for the differences and not to find the similarities.
Yeah.
And until you can put down our differences and look for the similarities, and especially with youth at risk today, you're going to have a tough time dealing with them.
Yeah.
Your relationship, the way you articulate and interchange with them changes when you know them personally.
Yeah. Cole, I'd like to hear your insights.
Yeah, so kind of going off of the question about how difficult is it to get off the streets, one of the things that a misperception that folks have is that anyone who wants to get off the streets can, you know, go to your local shelter, get in that night, and then have some stable place to stay. But in truth, even if an individual had ID, was willing to follow all the rules, was willing to show up on time and meet curfews, was able to be sober if that was the rules, even if that was the case, we still wouldn't have enough shelter in this community for everyone who needed it, who wanted to get off the streets. So I think that kind of goes in tandem with this idea that getting off the streets takes a while, and often it takes a while because the services just aren't there. And then kind of going off of what David was just talking about in terms of focusing on strengths. You know, one of the philosophies that we use at Community Youth Services is called positive youth development, and it is one of the basic tenets of that is to be strength-based. So rather than perceiving someone in terms of their deficits and shortcomings, you look at them in terms of their strengths, their skills, their talents, and their potential, and then work to cultivate that through empowerment.
Yeah, it's a whole different approach, and we need more of that in other aspects of our society as well, but certainly in this area. Meg, I want to connect back with you on a related thing about the housing issue. You know, for a long time, we all know social service agencies would say, oh, you've got to stop drinking or you got to kick your drug habit, and then we'll find you a place to live. And some years ago, that started to get flipped over and said, let's get you a safe, decent, clean place to live. Housing first became the thing.
Today.
And I know that they've been doing this in King County and a bunch of other places, and it seems to work. Tell us about that approach. What's different about it?
Yeah. So I think you stated it really well. It really kind of turns the paradigm over, and we don't have very many options at all in Thurston County for housing first housing. And so that is something that for our guests at our shelter, many of them will not ever be able to move on until we have housing first in Thurston County. And so until then, we're the last stop for them besides the streets. And what that looks like is exactly like you explained. You provide housing first, but you have easily accessible services for chemical dependency, for mental health, and for medical, because a lot of folks that would qualify for living in a Housing First program also have chronic long-term health conditions and physical disabilities. And so you provide those services, but you don't make participation a requirement in order to have your basic needs met. You provide for people's basic needs, and then what research shows, really famous research out of Seattle, actually, our neighbors to the north, that it not only are people much more likely to participate in services and to be successful in services, but it also saves huge amounts of money to the public because they have less, because of their chronic health conditions, oftentimes they have less dependence on emergency services. And so it saved the city of Seattle $4.1 million in the first year that 1811 East Lake, which was a Housing First program there, opened up. And so our shelter at Interfaith Works, part of what we're doing is trying to introduce this system of Housing First to Thurston County so that we can change the paradigm.
Yeah, that's good. There's another thing that we need to flip also, and that's, we've had the war on drugs, where it's all about, just say no and all that crap. And the flip is that instead of demanding that people just quit your habit cold turkey, the new thing is harm reduction, which you folks all support, and I agree, which is to say, even before you stop the habit or stop the destructive whatever that is, let's at least find ways to reduce the harm that it's causing. And I wonder, Cole, if you could talk us a little bit about harm reduction. We're a little bit behind schedule on the program, but tell us something about harm reduction, and then we'll get into something exciting that David's been doing for years.
I was just going to say, most of what I found out about harm reduction through long hair David. So, but yeah, harm reduction.
He's a resource in this community. Most people in the community do not realize what a great resource this guy has been for decades here. So we owe you a lot of thanks.
The philosophy behind harm reduction is that there is a continuum of recovery, and abstinence is certainly within that continuum, but it's only one of many options, right? And so as someone is trying to make healthier choices, the goal of harm reduction isn't abstaining from the substance, especially if it's helping them cope or deal with stressors in their lives. It's helping to reduce the harm that's associated with that substance use or risky sexual behavior or, a lot of different things. So one way that I like to talk about harm reduction for folks who aren't familiar with it is when you get in your car to drive somewhere, more than likely you put on a seatbelt. Because if you get in a car accident, you don't want to go flying through the windshield.
Harm reduction.
That's harm reduction.
Yeah.
We have glasses of water sitting here in front of us so we don't get dehydrated. That's a form of harm reduction.
And it's harm reduction to the community also in medical bills and everything else.
Right. You brush your teeth every day so that you don't get gum disease. That's harm reduction. So it's not hard for people to understand this concept of harm reduction when you kind of show them how they already do that. But when then you apply it to folks around the streets, a lot of times what we're talking about when we say harm reduction is needle exchange programs, HIV testing, Hep C testing, wound care clinics. So there's a lot of different concrete services that are provided that are very harm reduction based.
Naloxone reverses heroin overdose.
Okay.
Harm reduction.
So you've got that available if you happen to encounter somebody.
Lewis County just ordered their police department to carry it. New York Police Department is carrying it. Several other, about 19 to 20 other police departments that I know of in the county, in the world are carrying it. And I want to make a little bit of acknowledgement to Dan Biggs, Chicago Recovery Alliance, who brought this to this country and put it out there. And Eggy Hop has been distributing naloxone for over 10 years.
That's amazing. That's great stuff.
Yeah. And,
Thanks.
and it saved people's lives.
So
and the harm reduction is saving people's lives long enough to get them into a point in their life to make a better, clearer judgment for themselves. I'm an ex-IV drug addict, and you know, I have hepatitis B, for instance, but I don't have hepatitis C. This would have cost millions of dollars between my possible diagnosis of hepatitis C and death. It's going to be a bigger epidemic than HIV. We're not talking about hepatitis C, and at every point right now, we should probably inject hepatitis C into the conversation rather than HIV. Because if we go after hepatitis C, we're going after a much more virulent virus. We're going to stop the spread of HIV with no problem, and we're going to go after something that's a bigger killer. And it's the last thing this country wanted to talk about. We knew about this 20-some years ago, and so I get really a little bit off subject.
Good for you. Good for you. And part of what we need to do, and part of the value of this program, this conversation, is we're raising some issues that the society needs to deal with, and mostly we just don't want to talk about it, or we'll vent from our own biases rather than look at what the realities are. So I appreciate that. I want to get into the needle exchange as an example of the harm reduction, because you've been working on this for a long time, and the political establishment and the mainstream media, nobody was really taking it seriously or looking at it as the constructive thing that it is. It was just all, negativity. I want to show you made a video with TCTV people about 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago. It runs just a little over 5 minutes. Let's watch it now, and then we'll have just a little bit of time to comment from you after that.
This is 20 years later, so bear that in mind, guys.
Yeah.
The guy in this video knew what he was talking about. I don't know what happened since then.
And his hair wasn't yet gray. But the point is that you were onto this, and the general public and the political structure has been resisting this for decades. But you were on top of it.
I want people to understand, for me to watch some of these videos and stuff, it's really neat to see yourself 20 years ago. But also, I know the people that died.
Yeah.
And I know my failures also in the prevention work, and it's hard for me sometimes.
Yeah.
I know that in the video I talk about access to treatment in there, and it's just as hard today.
Yeah.
We talk about attracting people downtown by social services. Well, there was more social services when I got here in 1991 downtown than there is ever today. There was 3 treatment providers downtown, right downtown. No treatment providers downtown, no accessibility. All we got is a couple of free kitchens and stuff that people are complaining that is going to supposedly attract people to this area.
Okay, well this little 5-minute video will be a heads up for folks who have not seen it.
I'm long-haired David, and I'm a street outreach worker here in Olympia for the injecting drug community. Even in Olympia, our state capital, we have an injecting drug community. And it's our social responsibility to try to protect ourselves and that community from the disease of HIV and AIDS.
As of June 1st, 1991, 32% of the AIDS cases in the United States have been reported in IDUs or their sexual partners. Needle exchange programs, like the one here in Olympia, provide new sterile syringes in exchange for used syringes. This greatly reduces the incidence of needle sharing between users and thereby directly decreases the spread of HIV and AIDS.
When we did our research project in the very beginning to find out what we wanted, what the injecting drug community needed to protect itself from this epidemic, the one thing that everybody asked for was they needed access to clean syringes here in Thurston County. Now I have a fairly good outreach exchange going and a pretty good rapport with my clients. They come to me for syringes, and I talk to them about whether or not they've had recent tests for HIV, what they're doing with their life as far as engaging in sexual practices. I try to give them the latest up-to-date bleach and teach information as far as cleaning your syringe with bleach is concerned. And I try to encourage them to do whatever they can do to limit their risk factors in regards to contracting HIV. It's really important that we understand that one day's work or one day's exchange or one education encounter with an individual, it really doesn't mean much in the long run. And in terms of changing behaviors, if it's the consistency, that consistent reinforcing of behaviors that gets the job done. We have to grasp onto anything that the individual is doing right and reinforce that behavior and tell him, look, you're doing a good job on that. Now if you can just use condoms when you have penetrative sex all the time, you'll reduce your risk. We can teach them how to be socially responsible to themselves and to the others in their community. And that in itself is a bit of recovery. And so the next time I see you, we talk about recovery, we talk about using condoms more often, and you tell me that you never share your syringe anymore. That's excellent. Keep that up, you know, and I'll be here for you. You come on, see me in, I'll have clean rigs for you and condoms, and we'll see about getting you in to see the doctor, and maybe one of these days you and I'll sit down and we'll talk about getting clean. Yeah. I must admit, I'm not selling treatment like I should because I have nothing to sell hardly. I would like to be in a position where I can say to you, I'm not here to fix you, but I am here to offer you some prerogatives with your life. They ain't got a chance right now, and I don't want to tell them that. I don't want to tell them now. When they come to me and they say, Dave, I need some help, I can't tell them, look, bud, it'll be 6 months before I can get you in a treatment program. How do you like that? I don't have the guts to tell them that. I say, hey, we'll work towards this, you know. And it's going to take a while, and you're going to have to be determined. And that therapeutic window of willingness, you know, that opens up when an addict's hurting and he wants to get out, it don't stay open very long, you know. It just goes slamming back shut. It's going to be up to the community. It's going to be up to the people out here in Thurston County. Do they want to stop the spread of HIV? Do they want to keep Olympia and the greater Olympia area as unscathed as we can possibly keep it? It's going to take a lot more than just my work. The AIDS crisis is not over. It's time for action. The road of life is rocky, and you may stumble through. So while you talk about me, someone else is judging you.
There's both a bittersweet thing when I watch this, and I was trained by some of the best. Like I said, ACT UP. Chicago, we took our classes. We were talking about Hep C way back then. A lady named Holly worked with the Health Mobile, wrote one of the first papers on hepatitis C. So we knew the statistics, and these statistics are important to me today because they told us what would be the future of youth at risk. They told us how certain behaviors and stuff are going to look and trends coming up the West Coast. All predictable things. All predictable things that we're reaching now. We're not using our history and what we already know to combat what we have today at youth at risk, for sure.
Well, I appreciate, you know, I've known you since probably as long as you've been in town, and respected the work you do, and you're always way ahead of everybody else. And the local governments never appreciated you.
I disagree with way ahead. Dorothy Day was not way ahead. Okay, I'm a Catholic worker. That's not way ahead. Emma Goldman was not way ahead. I didn't call it the Eggy Hop, the Emma Goldman Youth and Homeless Outreach Project, for nothing.
Yeah, right. But I mean, you're on top of the information and the perspectives that we needed, and nobody in the political establishment was paying attention or even liked what you were doing. But there are some people who appreciate it. It's been, and it's still that way.
And for folks who don't know, the first needle exchange in the country started in Tacoma by Dave Purchase. Yeah,
Grandfather David, R.I.P. David, and R.I.P. Bob in the U District.
Yeah. We talked some about the labeling that people get and the stigma attached, but we could say some more. When we were preparing for the program, each of you had things to say about the damage that's done by labeling people and the stigma.
I have a point of interest right here about needles and needle exchange.
Go ahead.
I almost feel like telling the drug addicts in my community that uses the services of needle exchange with us, thank you for throwing your syringes in the streets. Really. This community would not know we have the level of drug problem if it wasn't for the reaction to the needles in the street. They would not be dialoguing. They would not know we have a serious, serious problem. And if we were to put the same amount of reactionary fear and everything else that we do on those syringes that end up in our streets as we would towards the Mexican mafia who is dump trucking drugs into my community, then we could start to answer some of the underlying issues.
Okay, but it makes a big difference how you respond, and I hope that people would take the advice of folks like yourselves that are on top of a realistic understanding of it.
And I think what David's speaking to, kind of goes along with the stigma conversation. And one of the things I talk about often is that I employ an idea that I call zoom out, and that's almost exactly what you're talking about. Is that we often attribute whatever problems we see and whatever problems we're afraid of or fear to happen more often, we attribute it to the individual that we believe is the reason for those problems, rather than zooming out and looking at any structural reasons that individual might be having that behavior and focusing energy on those bigger issues. And so, like what you're talking about is where are the drugs coming from into our community, rather than who are the people that are throwing needles onto the street.
And what I've been saying for years is, what is it about our society that causes people to suffer in such a way that they will self-medicate with that? Why are they unfulfilled? Why are they not having better things to do with their lives? So we need to look at what our society and our economy are doing that result in self-destructive behaviors by people.
And I think it's really hard because for a business owner who goes outside every morning and there's someone sleeping there, or they have to clean up needles, or they have to clean up human excrement, I'm sure that it gets tiring. And I work downtown. I'm down there every day. Many of my friends, most of my community are downtown every day and dealing with those things. But to not recognize that person is in that position, or that needle is in that position for a reason that has much more to do about our society and less to do about that individual.
Yes.
But you don't get any it's harder to blame a society for something than it is to blame the person that you see every day when you walk out your front door. And I just think that that's something we tend to do to people, and it's very, very damaging.
There's been studies, there's been experiments done that showed that it was the environment that people were in that directly had an effect on whether or not people engaged in substance use. They did this with rats. There was a study called Rat Park, and what they did was they put rats in a cage and they gave them cocaine. And the rats, they took the cocaine until they killed themselves. And then they took those same rats that were addicted to cocaine and put them in an environment where they had spinning wheels and all the good things that rats would want to have in their environment. And guess what? They didn't use the cocaine. And so I think it goes to show kind of what Meg is saying in terms of like looking at this in terms of a societal community issue is, particularly with young people, we need to create those opportunities and protect those spaces so that they can have environments that support them in terms of having other options. Yeah.
And it's the perception also,
Yeah.
because what we ever heard about from that study in the 70s was that the rat just took the cocaine until it died, and never heard the other side of it, that if they had the healthy environment, they wouldn't. So the perception is that addicts will just take their drug until they die with no other, option.
Well, it leads us into a point that all of you made, which is that our society keeps telling young people, you're not welcome here.
And I always get really puzzled about this, especially with this Machiavellian attitudes of personal responsibility for your situation of homelessness. For one, especially in regards to youth at risk, it's like there's this large portion of our community that I don't know if they've ever been kids. They never went through being youth to search for your identity and to find some place in this world that relates to self. Without a sense of self, one can't find it. Without a sense of place, one can't find a sense of self. Without that, you can't have a sense of community. Or you can flip that over by giving somebody a sense of community. You can help them find a sense of place and a sense of self.
So yeah, a couple of you had told me on the phone when we were preparing for the program that the young people would gather someplace, and then we chase them out of there, and then they gather someplace else. We chase them out. It's like a whack-a-mole game, and that goes to just what you're talking about.
This game of whack-a-mole has been going on for 23 years in this thing with the youth at risk in this city.
Yeah.
They have, everywhere they pop up, if it's not the park downtown, whack-a-mole. If it's not the new transit center, whack-a-mole. If it's not the Artesian Commons, whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're further marginalized an already marginalized population of people. You're dispersing them into, you don't want to see them, you want to push them in. This is when I found out, especially in the early age, in the transmission rate of blood-borne pathogen, these are primary elements it needs to cultivate and to incubate these kind of things. And so all your societal ills, whether it be mental health, drug addiction, all these things start to amplify the further you marginalize the population.
Yeah, and what would happen if we treated young people as people that we actually value and felt good about, as some of you have said? One of you, who was it that said, I had a note in here, I don't remember what it was. One of you mentioned something about childhood development model.
Well, that's the positive youth development that Cole was speaking to.
Yeah, so, like I said earlier, a lot of our young people, they've had trauma in their lives, and so they have experienced arrested development. But when you create an environment where youth feel like they belong, they have the ability to develop safe and meaningful relationships with adults and other peers. They have opportunities to grow and to develop skills, and they're welcomed. Then a lot of times that development basically restarts itself, and that's how we move our young people into adolescence, into adulthood, is by giving them those opportunities and creating those environments where they're feeling welcomed and they feel like they have a place that's theirs.
I think I've caught myself recently in some of these snap judgments that we're talking about. And the snap judgment is like, this kid, the same kid a week ago comes for me for a sleeping bag, for instance. And I just gave you one a week ago, nice ones, and yours are wet now. Didn't I give you a tarp? I get to talking to them, and a lot of these kids have never been camping, period.
Okay.
Never. So we're talking habilitation, not rehabilitation. We're so marginalizing them, pushing them further and further into the recesses of our community that any of these ills that everybody wants to point out, the minute they get to the Artesian Commons or a place like that, they want to point out all these ills, but they don't want to map any roads to recovery.
Well, let's play with what your vision is, because you've got a vision for that artesian well area. It's on 4th Avenue, just west of Jefferson Street, the little artesian well park.
What I had envisioned here is the end of the game of the whack-a-mole. First of all, the community has a denial that we have a youth, and they have a right to our community and a place and a sense of place. And so we need to talk about doing things like calling the Artesian Commons a youth park, and quit denying them a place in our community. We need to bring them into the fold and not to push them out of the fold. We need to give them something to model after. I had made a real quick rough draft proposal just when the whole Artesian Commons was being talked about being fenced off and all these different things. They're spending $30,000 on a mural when these kids can paint a wall like nobody's business. And they give them no expression. It's a classic example of nobody wants to understand the hip-hop generation and graffiti. First of all, it's one of the finest expressionary art forms. If we had a time-lapse video of the free wall behind the Capitol Theater, it would be one of the most amazing pieces of art you've ever seen in your life. I've never seen anything more discriminated for their art form than hip-hop and graffiti. And not understanding that this is not rap, this is not separate, this is part of a thing of an art expressionary thing, just like steampunk art is for the steampunks.
Wait, but say your idea at the well, because it's a good one.
Yeah, that's what I want to explore.
Okay, none of the food trucks want to be down there. We have 3 stalls down there. What I suggest is that we give CYS, maybe Eggy Hop, maybe even have some of the church groups, each have a trailer or a truck, and they disseminate information and services. Bring services where you see ailment, rather than send the police. We keep depending on policing to do everything. Our cops now have to be like psychologists / jailer. It's just not working. Yeah. And we got all these new rookie police just introduced to our police force, and none of them were brought down into the community and introduced to the flora and fauna of the community. Yeah. I run into rookies all the time I've never met. And you can give directions in this town. Just go by the guy all dressed in black. He's got long hair and he's got a cup of coffee. That's 4th and Eggy Hop. Turn left. You know. So why would the cops coming on are not brought into a community policing relationship with the local flora and fauna, especially in regards to youth and risk? Because I got news for you. I got frenemies today, 20 some odd years later, that are cops. And if you'd have told me that when I got out of the penitentiary, I'd have laughed you right off the. You know, so this relationship, and the cops, those old timers especially tell you, you watch them grow up, you watch them have children, and this relation starts early on.
Yeah. Well, you know,
they're not going to go away, Glenn.
A lot of police cars in different communities will say to serve and protect, or to protect and serve, and we don't get that. What we see around the country
they're serve and protect, and I think most of them have it down to pretty good science, so long as you own a business and you got a credit card in your back pocket and an address.
But it's not the general public, and it's like what we need, instead of an occupying army, we need people who actually are hired from the community. And I don't know if they have a policy of preference for hiring people who came from here, but it's the orientation of you know, what's your relationship with the people. Like you say, if you don't know the people.
Well, yeah, well, like Dave's saying, even if you didn't grow up in this community and you didn't have a relationship with the folks who were downtown, you could still build one. You know?
People come up to me all the time. A young lady came up to me a while back, and she says, "You don't remember me. Used to help me when I was 16 years old." And I went, "Yeah, sure." And I'm talking to her, and I got this little morbid curiosity going, and I says to her, "Well, how old are you now?" She says, "I'm 36. And I'm supposed to remember you 20 years later. And you are supposed to remember them. When youth hit the streets, the younger they are, they don't forget nothing. I may not have been homeless, but I was the one person they connected with being a tramp or homelessness on the streets of Olympia, and they never forget. They will come up to you the rest of your life.
I do want to also add to that conversation of just that another disconnect is that I think that the general public doesn't understand that folks that are on the street really know what's going on and know what the attitude is about them.
Yes.
And so, for example, we tried to open the Interfaith Work Shelter in a number of different locations and got moved away from those locations. And the people that stay at our shelter, they knew that. They read the newspaper, they saw the youth that these negative attitudes come down on. They know that the city feels that way about them. And no one can succeed in an environment where you feel like everyone wants you gone. And so I think that that's an important thing that we need to shift.
That's important.
And there's this idea that we have a group of young people downtown who are vulnerable, who are at risk from being exploited, and then we have a separate group of individuals who are troublemakers, who are criminals, who are causing problems. And what I try to get people to understand is those are not mutually exclusive groups, that these are the same individuals. It's very complex and there's a lot of overlapping issues, but you don't really come to understand that until you take the time to get to know those individuals that you're speaking with and to hear their stories.
Yeah, a couple of you mentioned that the importance of that on the phone is to really get to know. One of you said, don't try to change somebody's behavior until you actually have a relationship with them. Otherwise, you're coming at it in a top-down.
When these children are having children, and when you know a wino for 20 years, and you know the individual behind that disease, and when you know the individual behind schizophrenia, and you learn to love them, when you work social services like we are, we have a tendency to love some of the most. You get to meet people. I mean, how do you love somebody like Wild Bill downtown? I love the old man. You know, he's a year younger than me, by the way. It was a year and a day.
Well, there's some inherent humanity in every person. I mean, that's the old Quaker notion. There's that of God in every person, and we need to recognize that. Community Youth Services has been around for a long time. They do a lot of really good work. I think probably the public doesn't understand how much good stuff they do, but there's a website that I looked at that had pretty good information on it. It's communityyouthservices.org. The phone at the office is 943-0780, and then within Community Youth Services is Rosie's Place. That is so good as a drop-in place. It's a place where kids can actually be welcome.
And by kids, I mean youth and young adults. So just to clarify that, we work with folks teens. All the way up to age 24.
That's just a great resource. We need to lift that up as very good. They also have a Facebook page they can contact. I want to lift up the work that you're doing with the Interfaith Works overnight shelter. It's being housed at First Christian Church, 7th and Franklin. People I know who've been through the training are so much impressed with the attitude of the training and the way it operates, with a real respect for the people who stay there. I appreciate Interfaith Works overall. The interfaith-works.org. It's Interfaith Works of Thurston County. It used to be Associated Ministries. I joined as an individual member back in the 70s, and the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation is an affiliate member. We're not a religious congregation, but we appreciate what they do, and we have members of all faiths and people of no faith. So we're an affiliate member, and we participate actively.
And I will just add also to clarify that we are a 37-bed shelter for single adults and couples without dependent children. So we really do target that population of folks that are 24 and older, and that are the most vulnerable, highest needs folks.
Yeah, people that really need that safe place to be. And the website is iwshelter.org, and there's an emergency hotline at that website.
And for folks who are under the age of 24, CYS also has a shelter, an overnight shelter.
Not enough beds. Not enough beds.
I would agree.
But good attitudes at both places, and it's models to build on.
So I'm now working for FSU. It's my final and fourth not-for-profit here in Olympia. It's fixed stuff up. And I now doing this in semi-retirement. It is my project's goal is to do outreach to outreach workers. I work with Cole. I work with Meg Martin here. This is my niece, my adopted niece. I've had the privilege to work with some of the greatest young people in this town has ever to offer. I just had a birthday party at the Obsidian, and we had over 40 Eggy Hop harm reduction guerrilla outreach workers in the house. You wouldn't believe the bands and stuff that played that night, and the talented people who've worked for Eggy Hop and put their time 7 days a week. These are real guerrilla street harm reduction outreach workers working in the streets 7 days a week, every day of the week, doing what people should do.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I want to just spell out Eggy Hop for those that don't remember when we announced it at the beginning. It's the Emma Goldman Youth and Homeless Outreach Project. The website, www.oly-wa.us, and then /EGYHOP. You can just Google Eggy Hop
Facebook.
Olympia, and then you got a Facebook page.
Yeah,
so Facebook page, I guess, is more accurate.
Well,
more
Facebook's the new
current.
mark of the beast.
Yeah.
If you ain't got a Facebook page,
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to heaven.
Yeah, yeah.
And remember my new project here, it's going to be Pampers for the Homeless. The new Pampers for the Homeless project is going to, through FSU, fix stuff up. We're going to try to get the city to put in, drop boxes downtown so that you could just pick up your homeless Pampers down there like they have the dog little baggies in the poles downtown. We finally got a high security bathroom down at the Artesian Commons, and FSU is here to fix stuff up.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to mention Partners in Prevention Education. They do great work to reduce sexual violence, bias, and other things that people experience in the streets. www.youthchangeagents.org. So that's good. I want to thank all of our guests. We've got 3 people who are really walking the talk, who know how to function, and you're actually doing it. And I very much appreciate the work that you're doing and the nonprofit groups that you work with, Cole Ketcherside, Long Hair Davis, and Meg Martin. I want to thank the people who've been watching the program. Governments and social service agencies tend to come with a top-down approach, and you folks really do solidarity. And so I appreciate the knowledge, the expertise, and the big heart that you practice. I hope that people will get involved in whatever ways they can, support their efforts, and find ways to connect. We're all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to do our part. And the world needs exactly what you have to offer. Thanks.
Thank you.